Welcome to Banyan Books, Branches of Wisdom, celebrating the joy of bright ideas and heartful lifelong learning. Branches of Wisdom is a series of intimate conversations with the world's most influential authors and visionaries. We explore spirituality and the human mind, ecology and culture. Most episodes are recorded with a live audience. You can join our live events and submit questions to your favorite guests. Check out our upcoming schedule at banyan.com. Since 1970, Banyan Books has been a rich oasis at the crossroads of wisdom and philosophy, offering resources for humanity's evolving paths. We're a locally owned, independent bookstore in the heart of Vancouver's Kitsilano neighborhood. Visit us in person or shop online at banyan.com. Please subscribe, follow, like, and leave your reviews for the podcast. And now, enjoy. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Branches of Wisdom, the Banyan Books live streaming event and podcast series. I'm your host, Ross McKeechee, and very excited this evening that we have Paul Hawken as our special guest. Before we speak to Paul, I want to let you know that most of Banyan's podcast and event series are free, and we welcome your donations to keep these programs accessible for all. Just go ahead and click on the PayPal link in the show description below. Banyan Books acknowledges that although we have people joining us from all over the world for these live streaming events, the physical location of Banyan Books is on the traditional and unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, including the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Towards the end of our conversation today with Paul Hawken, we'll be taking questions from you, our live audience. So go ahead and type those into the chat on YouTube, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. Today, Banyan Books is in conversation with Paul Hawken about his latest book, Carbon, the Book of Life, which is a sweeping and hopeful exploration of carbon's true nature, not as a climate villain, but as the elemental force that animates all life. Hawken invites us to see carbon anew, revealing its essential role in plants, animals, fungi, farms, and human existence. With depth and humanity, he reclaims carbon's story and guides us toward a more integrated, life-affirming relationship with nature and ourselves. Paul Hawken is a best-selling author and leading voice for the regeneration of nature and humanity. He has written 10 books published in over 50 countries, of which 6 have been national and New York Times bestsellers, including The Ecology of Commerce, Blessed Unrest, and Regeneration. He founded Project Drawdown and Regeneration, 2 influential efforts to reverse climate change that have earned him global recognition and 6 honorary doctorates. He advises governments, corporations, and NGOs on systemic solutions for a just and thriving planet. And his website is paulhawken.com. Banyan community, please join me in a really, really warm welcome for Paul Hawken. Hello, Paul.
Hi, thank you so much, Ross. I feel right at home. I've been to Banyan twice for readings, and once on a terribly cold, rainy night, and it was full of people. And the other time it was during the day. But it's just a lovely, lovely institution. It's more than a bookstore. I think bookstores like that do, even if you didn't do this, webcasts, and if it was just a regular bookstore in that sense, they are, to me, pivotal to a community, and without which I don't think there are communities, because then you're left with, basically TV, and news channels and stuff like that, So thank you for inviting me. Thank you for what you do, and I'm grateful.
Oh, thanks so much. I didn't know you'd been there, and that description of a rainy night reading at Banyan, that feels to me like the essence of the community there. Yeah. So this whole book, Paul, carbon, it's so poetically written. It's really beautiful. And in chapter 2, which is titled Elements, you write in this poetic style about carbon's role in life. And I'm quoting you here. It enables and informs every aspect of consciousness, a benign sovereign directing the expression of the living world. It can do so because it connects and disconnects, holds fast, coal, releases easily, sugar, is pliant, bamboo, and shimmers in the cornea of a cheetah's eye. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what carbon is and the role it plays in our lives and in all of nature.
Well, I mean, as soon as we name an element, then we think it's a thing. Sodium, it's nitrogen, and it is, molecularly speaking, no question about it. Carbon in chains is the only element that can have memory and store energy. So you think of those two things, memory and energy. Without those, there's no such thing as life. People have tried to model silicon as the basis of life. You can't get there from it. You can't get there from any elemental point of view. Carbon is extraordinarily unique, and how it came about is also part of the book, because we being science, excuse me, not me, but science did not understand where carbon came from for a long time, and yet it's in 99% of every single thing on Earth, whether it's inert or living or otherwise, not water. And so it's mysterious in that way too, and its behavior is still yet to be divined and fully understood, because it has these qualities. But for us and you and I and the listeners, it is not. People we see the basis of life. Well, what does that mean, base? It is just spectacular in what it does. We have 1.4 trillion atoms of carbon in every cell in our body. Okay, and we have 30 plus, 32, 34 trillion cells. The math is ridiculous, but the point being is, what are they doing in there? Well, inside the cell, it's a chemistry set. It's chemistry. But the cell inside is not alive. It's chemistry. Chemistry is not life. But you put it in a cell, in a carapace, now you have a living organism. It's called a cell. It's called a community. And there's, I think, a teaching in that, or a hint to the rest of us and all who are struggling right now with who we are as human beings here on this planet. But life only exists in community. And from my point of view, the only way we get back to some sort of sensible relationship to the living world, to each other, and all the other 3.4 trillion creatures that are Earthmates is through community. And again, I'm not trying to lay it on you guys, but Banyan creates community. That's what bookstores do.
Yeah. At the end of chapter 2, I wanted to ask you this. You say human bodies are communities of life without which we perish. So too are all forms of life. The word community is essential to solving the crises we face.
Right.
Why is community so essential in solving these crises?
Because what we have right now is top-down solutions to climate, and we have top-down mayhem from politicians and corporations. And the world is not, nature is not top-down. It's not a top-down system. It's not a bottom-up system either. It's not like those two poles and so forth. Nature, as I say, is community. And so it's like there's a radical middle between, upheaval and, apocalyptic nightmares and trying to solve it with conference of the parties and getting together once a year and you get all the right people in the right countries together and, have lots of good meals and good hotels and talk and meet and stay up all night and come up with draft memos and, commitments and so forth. I mean, Thank you, but it doesn't work that way. I'm not saying you shouldn't get together. I'm not people. I mean, people should get together. You know, it's a wonderful thing. But the idea that somehow that's going to solve the climate problem, no, it's not going to solve it. It doesn't make it worse, except all the airplane flights and hotel. But again, carbon is our teacher. You know, how does carbon work? You know, and it is just so exquisite in whether it's in the soil or whether it's in mycelia or whether it's in, you know, the carried in the rain, by the way, from northern Africa all the way to the Amazon. I mean, carbon's the passenger, it's the promoter, it's the generator, it's the enlivening element, you know. And I think once we kind of step back from the kind of monotheism of the climate movement, you know, this idea that, you know, we're going to fix it and combat it and tackle it, and all these male verbs, like thinking that climate is other, you know, as those are greenhouse gases up there, and my God, we're going to bring them back home and capture them and pump them into the earth. You know, all this language and intention is really emblematic, Ross, of the mindset that created the problem. It's exactly the same mind that created global warming, that double glazed the planet. Because what it does is separate everything, objectify it, and then try to fix it or change it or extract it, or, you know, we're trying to extract carbon so we can put it someplace else. And again, so there's this sort of resonance, you know, between the climate movement, which I think has failed, frankly, and the cause. You know, they're the same mindset.
Okay, there's a couple things I'd like to unpack there if we could. One is, it seems to me a core theme in the book that you're telling us we need to learn, or maybe it's remember, how to perceive ourselves and lives through a completely different lens than our Western enculturation has instilled in us. And the other piece I'd like to talk about is what you just said with the climate movement failing, and what those failings are. So maybe we can just talk about the perception that needs to shift first, because that's really inherent in the failings also, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's not for me to say what the perception should be. I can talk about a perception that actually is shooting itself in the foot, and that would be the climate movement. Now, when I say it's failing, I do not mean the individuals, the people, the groups that are actively pursuing the prevention of deforestation, that are working so hard on issues with the sea, with water, I mean, soil, farming, regeneration, species, I mean, uh, butterflies, you know, and pollinators. I mean, what people are doing is amazing. So that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a narrative that overlies all that, that is sort of government to government or government to business and business to this and all that sort of stuff, and taught to our kids too. And that's failed. The narrative has failed. And we knew 50 years ago exactly, actually longer than that, what would happen if we continued to double glaze the planet with CO2 and, you know, obviously methane and nitrous oxide too. But we knew exactly. I mean, the predictions that were made, I was at Stanford Research Institute when I first heard about this over 50 years ago. We knew everything we needed to know then. You know, there's nothing new since then. And so that was fine. But the narrative that grew out of that knowledge was one based on fear, understandably, okay, based on control. Well, we should control this. Yeah, you know, I mean, you can say, well, yeah, of course, don't do that. But the narrative that came out kept being sort of expanded in its implications and doomsaying, and by some very great scientists and people, you know, Bill McKibben and Jim Hansen and Michael Mann and others. But it actually almost cauterized society. You know, like, I don't know what to do. I have a mortgage, I'm trying to pay off my student loan. I got kids. I mean, I don't know what to do. And then these lame solutions came up like, oh, recycle. Not that you shouldn't, but I'm just saying, like, you think that's going to make a difference? It makes a difference in terms of the waste going someplace, for sure. You don't want the waste in the ocean. You don't want the waste in the soil. But as if that was going to be a solution, and it's a practice, and everybody should practice it in every city, every country, for sure. So again, we came up with some very lame solutions, and then we came up with renewable energy, which of course had been around since 1890, by the way. So it wasn't really discovered, but it was definitely improved in terms of cost and efficiency. But even then, the language, and there's no such thing as renewable energy. Again, it's a language that defies physics 101 or ninth grade physics. Energy, second law, goes in one direction and that never goes back, and you can't renew energy. That's just not possible. But current solar income is possible. So receiving current solar income, which every plant does, every forest, right, does, and we can have devices, that receive current solar income for sure. But again, it's just, again, an example of how we've languaged. I know that's not technically a verb, but languaged the situation so that 99%, more than 99% of the people on the earth right now, after more than 50 years of understanding the crisis at hand, don't do anything. They may think they do, they may care, they may have sympathy, or they may not too, in many cases, but they don't do anything on a daily basis. So that's what I mean by a failed narrative. Like, we should all be, we should get in the morning and what are you doing today? Well, I'm going to regenerate life on earth. What are you doing? But we don't do that.
Right. And this concept of regenerating nature, you name that as kind of the core question to ask ourselves in terms of decision making around climate issues and, I mean, living life itself, no?
I do. And when you say regenerate nature, with all due respect, you've done the same thing, which is you've separated from nature. From, I'm going to regenerate nature. Well, we're all over there. And we are nature. But I think that another way to look at it, if you read the headlines, and whether it's the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, or New York Times, the Post, or God forbid, Fox, but the news about what's going on, the heat right now, the lack of water, the too much water, basically the more volatile the climate is becoming worldwide, and affecting people. Most migration is caused by a loss of viability of where people are living. People don't want to leave their homes. That is not, and walk for miles and go through things and be subject to, migration is happening because the environment isn't supporting those villages, those cultures, those people in different places. And so if we look at the headlines, we look at the news, we look at the data, what we see, especially corporate, what we see is we're coming to an end of a road, and that road is extraction, of course, and all the corrosive effects of that on people, place, water, soil, everything, every creature. And so we can see the end of that road now. It's not like, oh yeah, this isn't a good idea. No, it's staring at us. So regeneration is simply saying, whoa, stop. We can't go there much longer or much further. So let's stop and do a 180. Now, what does it mean to regenerate, to make things, to provide needs for human beings, to take care of a place to farm, but actually, end of the day, end of the year, create more life instead of less? Because what we're doing is just taking life and just taking it and banking it, turning into dollars for the $45 million Jeff Bezos wedding in Venice starting this weekend. Next week.
Why didn't I get an invite?
Yeah, me too. No, why did people who got invites go is my question. You know better. You know, a lot of them know better, you know. Yeah. So yeah, regeneration, because it's innate to our cells, every living thing is the default mode of life. And so it's not about regenerating it. We are life. It's actually, it's a way of seeing and being in the world. And the outcome is pollinators, you know, fish, you know, all sorts of things, you know, returning, coming back, proliferating. But that also includes our children, you know, and our cultures, you know. I mean, the Native American cultures, you know, have been extraordinary in their capacity to be wiped out almost and come back and come back and come back and regenerate. That's what we see. I don't know as well as what's happening in Canada, but I can read enough to know it's happening there too. There's 520 tribal cultures in Turtle Island when the colonists came, when Columbus came, and they're coming back and they're regenerating. It's like, how did they do that? You know, malaria infused blankets and massacres and putting them in, you know, the schools you had there and we have here where, you know, the Catholic schools where the children were taken away, forbidden to speak their language, hair cut, you know, and frankly, sexually abused, you know, sometimes killed, buried, you know, without them parents knowing whatever happened to them. This, if anybody thinks regeneration is not possible, go to your local, I'm sorry, really, go to your local Indigenous people and just bow and say, I'm here, I'm all ears. Because I don't know how to do it, but somehow through 7 generations, you know, because they think a generation is 70 years, not 20. 7 generations. I don't even want to they them, you know, because it's like other, but I'm just saying these cultures, you know, have survived and now are reviving in just beautiful, exquisite ways and becoming powerful again. And so there's our teachers. You want teachers? They're here. They're everywhere. As opposed to somebody who's, you know, got a physics degree and is going to tell you about how the atmosphere works.
See, this is what I was trying to scratch at. Maybe I used the wrong term when I asked you about shifting perception. It's more a way of life, a worldview, a way of seeing that the Indigenous people have always lived with. They don't, that though it's built into those cultures that you are part of nature. You're not separating yourself from nature. You just mentioned the 7 generations, and in the book, in the final chapter of the book, you mentioned that idea and term comes from the great law of peace. And I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right. Haudenosaunee Confederacy.
The Haudenosaunee, yeah.
Haudenosaunee Confederacy
Yes.
in the late 16th century.
Right.
And one of the really cool things I thought, you mentioned Hindu Imaru Ibrahim, who is a Wadabe pastoralist from Chad. She was asked if her generation planned 7 generations ahead. And she added an important qualifier, which was, we can do this because we remember 7 generations into the past. And then you explained this was possible because of the community that she's a part of, the ways that information was retained in the culture. I'm wondering if you can speak a bit to community, culture, and how those are shaped by relationship to nature and memory.
I can. I really, I am just a white boy, got badly educated, you know. So that would be that would be presumptuous of me to comment or
Or
describe.
what have you observed or gleaned without claiming, to be an expert in that?
Well, what I've learned is that the language that is used by people whose grew up in one place. I mean, not just grew up, but I mean familially and generation after generation stayed pretty much in one place. Well, what did they learn there? Well, they learned a lot. They learned how to be there. For example, no Native American culture sold food. Never sold it. It's like, so it's a different way of seeing food, right? I mean, it doesn't mean they weren't amazing gardeners and farmers and hunters. They were, but it wasn't like, I have it, you don't. What are you going to give me? So, so again, it's not like they don't have a word for nature. Imagine you growing up as a child in a culture, in a place, northern Maine, southern Alabama, wherever, that was not ruined by freeways and, shopping centers and cars and so forth. It's just the natural world and so forth. And your culture, your tribe, your mother and father, your grandparents, had learned to live there for thousands of years. Well, there's a lot to teach, a lot to learn, but none of that learning came from the othering of that place. It came from empathy, from, these are our sisters, our brother. This is, I mean, they never, I should never say they, about them, because that's not my role. But I'm just saying, when I did study the language, indigenous languages, what's from dictionaries, by the way, and other people, what I found was that it's a metaphorical language. They use metaphor, and and it was Aristotle, not my favorite philosopher, but who did say metaphor is genius. And so I don't think there's a book called Are We Intelligent Enough to Understand the Intelligence of Animals? Okay. Well, I don't think we're intelligent enough to understand the intelligence of the people who arose on Turtle Island, some 12 to 20,000 years ago. There's a controversy about when and how, but that's not the point. And I'm not sure that our Western education, with its out of the Enlightenment, scientific revolution, that basically separated everything and said, this is not of that. This is a this, and that's a that, but don't get these two confused. And out of that came the nounism of our culture, the language, English language, extraordinary science. I'm in no way decrying it, not at all. But it was a language of separation. And so then you have another language that arose from a very different cultural, experience, I guess. And it was about how to be in that place. And one way you learn to be is to not other it, not to villainize it, not to make enemies of it, not to, and actually to revere it and to see it as sacred, to give it names that and so what I love about what's happening right now is that is called traditional ecological knowledge, or, there's different names for it. But it's observational science from people who stayed in one place for a long time, with the empirical science of the West, which is also observational in many ways. So don't get me wrong, but the two ways of seeing things in the world, and they've come together. They're touching, especially in young scientists right now, who really don't want to be, sort of caged by, the old establishment science. And you see it in Robin Wall Kimmerer, a great scientist, but Citizen Potawatomi. I mean, and in her writing, so beautiful, so exquisite. And there is in that prose that same thing. We'll try to find that divisiveness in Robin's books. You won't find it. And yet she's a great scientist. And yet, so when you talk about seeing and this and all, I don't know, all I know is when I feel it and I honor it. And I try to, in the book, say, look over here, But I also honor Buckminster Fuller too. I mean, so there's other people, you know, many others. But yeah, so I think it's just it's hard to get there. Reading books, even mine, it's hard to get there. You know, being just an activist, which is fine, by the way. I mean, we need activists. You can't. I don't think you can get there from here unless you have the experience. And it can be with a child. It doesn't have to be with a tree. It can be with an animal. It doesn't have to be with a, you know, a forest or, you know, a dolphin or something. I mean, you could, that experience of oneness, which is sort of a lame word, but the closest we can get, you know, most people have had it in some way or another. It could be, you know, plant medicine. It could be just being alone in some place at some point. Whatever it is, that is our true nature. That's everybody's true nature. And so it makes sense to look to those whose true nature is still more true to them than ours is to being lost, you know. And so that's what Carbon, really, the Book of Life's about. It's meant to say, just, it is exquisite where we live and extraordinary, and it's wondrous. And when we only get into this sort of lingo and language and belief of, you know, we're screwed and they are screwing us, and they are, by the way. There's no question about that. And there is a, but to find a place, you know, and it's right outside. You don't have to go far, and it's there for us. And but it's not there if we try to fix it. It's not there because then it's an it. There's no it there.
We have to be a part of it. We have to love it. We have to understand it in our own way rather than try and fix it. Is that what you're saying?
We don't have to be a part of it because that's still making it two things. I'm talking about an experience of self, not selfishness or separate identity, but an experience of self that has no end, has no limit, has no division, you know, no separation. And that experience is something that individuals maybe, I mean, look at your yogini, like people find it in yoga, they find it in meditation, they find it with a child, they find it with a pet, they find it, you know, I mean, I have redwoods here, and I read a book about the senses that plants have. They have 20 senses, distinct senses. We have 5. And so, well, why would plants have more senses than we do? Because they've been here a lot longer and survived. And we've been here a relatively short time. We were hunter gatherers. They were receivers. It's completely different, you know. But I read this thing about 20 senses. And when I walked to the path, you know, to where my, you know, old beat up car is, and there's trees. There are redwood trees, and some of them have 8-foot calipers. I mean, they're really big, beautiful, tall trees. And I went out there and I realized I was looking like literally the tree can see you. Plants can see. Now, what they see is chiaroscuro. It's like just sort of like a darker thing moving against a lighter landscape. Okay. But the trees sense that. So you go by, and I was like, oh my God. I'm walking and the trees are all aware of my passage on a pathway I built, you know, and it just changes you when you know that, taught that it's true. And then now you look at the trees. How do you see the trees? You see them completely differently. Now somebody else could learn that and just keep, you know, running around and not care. That's who they are. But I think most of the listeners that have a different experience, you know, which is the trees actually seeing it. Yeah. And so I would say that one of the things that my takeaway from the book is we don't know where we live. There's 3.4 trillion creatures here that are communicating every day. We don't know, have any idea what's being said, what's being communicated. It wasn't that long ago when we believed that we were the only animal that could communicate. It wasn't that long ago, And then, oh, well, primates. And then we let a few more animals in, and now and the whole zoo is walking in. But that world, which is the world we inhabit, is beyond mystery. Because mystery implies you can solve the mystery. What if you can't? What if it's mysterious the day you're born to the day you die? But you don't die because you're still in the mystery, whatever that spirit is. That's the person that isn't trying to fight, tackle, combat, fix. It doesn't mean they don't have purpose, and it doesn't mean they don't venerate. It doesn't mean they don't live and take actions in such a way that create more life. Of course they do, and it's step by step. They can't do a lot, but step by step by step, and that's really, I think it's like coming home. I think we have to come home, and, in order to be effective in restoring life on Earth.
I listened to your interview with Drew Purohit. I don't know if I'm saying his last name right, but This Changes Everything is the podcast. You said you love mysticism and mystery, but in this book you stick to the science and data, which you touched on just a moment ago. Even though you're sticking to the science and the data, and in this conversation now, you're very much walking the line, not even walking along, you're touching on bringing alive in us the mystery and the mystical. I'm wondering, do you find it problematic, the division we hold between science and spirituality, or science and mystery?
Yeah, that's just basically brain damage. No, I mean, that's just inculcation, from the West, and Western science and so forth. It's interesting because remember I said earlier that the West produced nouns, naming things, and I use the word nounism. I don't know if I made that word up or not. I don't care.
It makes sense, though.
Yeah, but the thing about languages for people who have resided in the same place for a long time is they're verbal. They're verb languages. And why? Because they're all about relationships. And that's what verbs are about, relationship. No relationship, no verb. And so it's not surprising that when those two cultures met, there was profound misunderstanding. Not to say that the Catholic Church didn't have a lot to do with it. Doctrine of discovery, and everything you see, the women, the men, the children, resources belong to Spain. And by the way, and they told everybody that in Spanish, which nobody could understand. So, I mean, that's the roots. Those are our roots in this continent. That just, So, but when language is not verbal but verbs, and so forth, it's all about seeing the connections and the interconnections, in all the in daily life, really, in daily life, and so the language being metaphorical. I mean, the Yamana had a word for depression. We say depression. They see a crab that hasn't finally molted its shell. Which language would I prefer? I like the crab one.
It's a metaphor.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Okay, I just want to remind our live audience, we're going to be getting to some of your questions for Paul in just a few minutes. So go ahead and keep typing those into the live chat on YouTube. We're speaking to Paul Hawken about his book Carbon, the Book of Life. Okay, we've really talked a lot about the Indigenous worldview and way of life, the kind of mystical almost perception. how do we bring this back to, okay, I'm an everyday guy. I'm looking at all of these seeming just catastrophes in terms of how human beings are managing the world. How does this relate, this internal shift really is what we're talking about right now? How does that relate to climate change and dealing with the biggest environmental crisis of all time for humanity? How do we translate that?
Well, several ways. First of all, stop using the second person plural. There is no we. And we use it in the West all the time, right? We use it. We need to, we are, we this, we that. Okay. Who's we? And I remember when I was near the Atacama in Chile, and a Yamana person said, I was saying something and he could understand English. And he just said, who's we? So that is our settler colonist mindset that we have, right? We have. I'm saying it, right? And so when we use that pronoun plural, the implication is that what's being spoken is on behalf of everyone, or our friends, or our country, or I mean, who's we? But I just think the other thing about that is it's such a burden to ask that question. I mean, how will we do X, or how will we surmount, or how will we survive, or how will we? Good questions, by the way. I'm not, but when we is larded onto it, it just becomes, and that's really what's happening to people, because they think somehow it's their job, to solve this huge, unbelievable problem. Well, they're not going to, it's just not going to happen in that way. And so that's, again, top down, because even top down mysticism is top down, or top down, belief system is top down. So I think it's really about community is a funny thing, but it's where people, whether they're musicians or yoginis, or whether they're farmers, or whether they're in a certain religion, or they just like each other, or they whatever, community is a very magical thing. It's a very magical thing, and it can be intentional communities, of course, but even whether it is or not, it doesn't make any difference, and you're experiencing no self, on a daily basis, and that no self is really which one wants to carry into every aspect of life, and the self will show up when it's needed, always. That's, we're wired on that one. But so again, I feel like it's the questions themselves, are important. How they're asked, and from what vantage point, are they being offered to others. And I am not an expert in this, on nonviolent communication, all different ways that people have talked about how we miscommunicate using the language that we are taught, and make divisions, within ourselves and others. I'm not an expert in that whatsoever, but I do know that the way we have basically, as I said, narrated our world right now is guaranteed to fail. In other words, it's not going to lead to anything that approximates what the living world needs and wants and strives for. And again, as I said, regeneration is default. So what we're talking about in terms of regeneration is creating the conditions. You create the conditions for life, the conditions for regeneration. We can't regenerate. We can't. I can't. But I definitely can create the conditions, in my environment, in myself, in my family, in my neighborhood, and learn and mistake and screw up and try again. And I'm not saying, but I can do that. You can do that. Everybody's listening can do that. You're creating the conditions for life in all its myriad forms.
Paul, we have some really nice questions coming in from the audience. Is it okay if we get to some of those? Okay.
Yeah. I wish I could see everybody, but I can't.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So great to have you here.
Yeah.
There's a question here from Jonah who says, in writing Carbon, what surprised you the most about how carbon behaves or interacts with life on Earth?
I think the thing that surprised me most is that if you look at the physics of it, that is how it is created, that it's unbelievable that we're here or that life is here. And there's a physicist, actually an astronomer, who was the one for years and years, people couldn't, scientists couldn't understand how carbon was created. In other words, it just didn't make sense. It's C12 and you got, hydrogen makes helium, and you take 3 helium and the math is perfect. And, 3 of those, you have a C12, hey, next question. Well, the resonance of helium and, 3 helium even, and do not make carbon, and atoms are not things, actually they're magnetic fields, there's hardly anything there really in the physical sense. But and so it was a mystery. And when it was finally proposed, it wasn't solved, proposed by Fred Hoyle, who's an astronomer, and he proposed it at Caltech in California, and he was laughed out of the room. He was mocked, he was made fun of, he was ridiculed, maybe under their breath and, in the hallways, not to his face because he was such an esteemed astronomer. And he was feisty. He was kind of hard to get along with, really, but he was feisty about his theory and of how it was created. And so they finally set up, an experiment to take nitrogen and bomb it with protons and work backwards to C12 and 14. And it succeeded. So his proposal that this is the form of carbon and how it was created was reified. And the people who made fun of him actually then submitted a paper with his name, and they won the Nobel Prize for physics. His name was left off. His name was left off because after that experiment, and this is a hardcore atheist, who made up the term the Big Bang as a term of derision. He just thought that was the stupidest theory he'd ever heard. Everything was created in the Big Bang. Yeah, right. Okay, but he said that you cannot explain the universe, carbon, physics, without a higher intelligence. And he got drummed out of the core, out of science. He said there's a higher intelligence. He didn't say it was God. He didn't say it wasn't God. He didn't name it. He said just a higher intelligence. And so, yeah, what happens in a giant red star? A star is going to, die, and as it dies, after all the hydrogen is being used up, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. It's a giant red star. Okay, and in that time in the star, basically 2 helium will bond for a trillionth of a second. It's called beryllium. Okay, that's beryllium. Okay, if in that if that trillionth of a trillionth second, another helium, alpha particle, gets in there, that's carbon. That's C12. That's 1.4 trillion of them are in every cell of your body. And it's so astronomically impossible for it to be so ubiquitous. But that's how carbon is made, So I think, to this day, physicists at Cambridge, say the odds of the universe being created as it is with life, or at least, a living universe. We live on a planet, but the universe being created and life existing is incalculably impossible. These are physicists saying, look at, we just don't know. So to that question about, it's like, okay, and so if this is Cambridge and Oxford and, Caltech saying the same things, like, look, we can't explain it. We can describe it, how it happens. Yeah, for sure. But given there's so many different factors, that besides the ones I shared, that conspire to create a carbon atom. So I think that one from the book and writing the book, carbon. I didn't know that before. You sort of feel like, oh, you're living a mystery. You are a mystery. You're living in something that is incalculably impossible. And yet, here we are. And that's why at the end of that chapter, I said, yeah, here we are. I'm writing and you're reading.
I loved reading that chapter. That was incredible. Yeah. Okay, thank you. And thanks, Jonah, for that question. We have another one here, Paul, from Nolan, who says, do you see capitalism and regeneration as inherently incompatible? Or is there a path of transformation? Yeah, that's simple. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Completely incompatible. Commerce is not incompatible. So let's make a distinction here, really important distinction. Commerce is ancient and sacred to me. When Lewis and Clark got to the Northwest, the Native Americans had beads, wampum, that's, whatever. But some of those shells were from Patagonia. Okay. How'd they get to Washington State? Or, commerce, exchange, trading. And so to me, commerce, that's why I wrote The Ecology of Commerce. I didn't write The Ecology of Business. I didn't write The Ecology of Capitalism. I wrote The Ecology of Commerce, which is humanity's ability to create, to share, to exchange. I got butternut squash. Well, I have sunflower seeds. I tell you, whatever it is, that's commerce. And so to me, that's sacred. Capitalism has nothing to do with commerce. It has to do with extraction and concentration, and growth, and many other things, of course. So, but it doesn't. But we live in a system that is dominated by capitalism, and I think what I see into the question of, like, I'm close to Silicon Valley, and you see a lot of climate tech and basically being sold to venture capitalists, to get money. Oh, what happened?
Everything okay there?
Yeah, I'm here. What happened? I don't know what happened.
Yeah, your screen just fluttered for a minute, but I think we got you here.
Yeah, everything went black actually, and then it came back.
Oh,
yeah.
It was a very momentary flash on our end.
Yeah, I was like panicking, but the and it's all about, we're going to make money and we're going to grow, and just like a regular thing, but we're going to address climate, through direct air capture. And 12 is a big company now that's going to take ethanol, which is corn made in Iowa, planted, grown in Iowa, made into ethanol, and take that and then transform it into sustainable airplane fuel so people can take a jet over to, Italy to go to Jeff's wedding. I mean, this idea, if you just do the math, it doesn't work. Direct air capture, we're going to suck the air down. We're going to take the C and the O2, and we're going to separate it. And the C, we're going to liquefy it. And then we're going to put it in pipes, and we're going to pump it into geological formations and so forth. And so this is capitalism, because basically the O2, the CO2, excuse me, the methane and the NOx and so forth, but particularly CO2 is a result of combustion, right? We're burned, coal, gas, and oil, wood too, and then that's the ash, so to speak. The gaseous ash is, it's called entropy. We know what it is. And so we're going to set up 20 million direct air capture machines on Earth. This is what people want to do, costing over $1 billion each and so forth, that run 24/7 all the way to 2100, and capture carbon and put it into the ground. And they say, well, we'll use renewable energy. We'll use the wind turbines. We'll use, whatever. If you use any form of energy and create it, that's also creating entropy. So what they're saying is that we're going to use entropy to fix entropy. I mean, that's a giggling thing. It's like, that's so hilariously wrong and untrue, and violating the second law of thermodynamics. You go, oh my gosh. But not far from me, they're writing big checks for that. So again, that's capitalism, to the questioner's point. That's not commerce.
It's amazing to see, like you just said, they're writing big checks for that just close by to you. And
Yeah.
it just doesn't make sense.
No, it just doesn't make it's like I say, second law. There's very few laws that science come up with that are really laws. That one is the law. Energy goes in one direction. It does not reverse itself. That's called entropy.
Thank you, Nolan, for that question. I think we have time for one more. This is from Maurice, who says, and I want to add to Maurice, this book is very hopeful and inspiring. And she's asking to you, Paul, what gives you the most genuine sense of possibility in this era of ecological uncertainty?
Oh, that's an easy answer. People, no question about it. There's extraordinary human beings on the planet right now. I'm not saying they weren't before. I don't know. I wasn't there. But I'm saying right now, at this time of, anxiety, fear, fascism, control, of madness, and so forth. That's what we read about. That's what we hear about. That's what makes the news. That's what, scares the pee out of us sometimes. But there are just incredible people on the planet right now. And the planet has intelligence, and it's an intelligent being too, and it's growing these amazing children and teenagers and adults and people, and they don't make me hopeful. They make me giddy. They make me happy. They make me delighted. And people say, well, is it enough in time? Forget those questions. They're unanswerable anyway. And somebody says, well, these are apocalyptic times. I say, yeah, oh yeah, no question. But the meaning of an apocalypse in the Greek is a time when what was hidden is revealed. That's an apocalypse. And yeah, we're in an apocalypse. And to Noel's question about capitalism, we thought, oh, it was the best thing since, sliced bread. No, it wasn't the best thing. It was our ruin if we could pursue that. So that's what delights me. And the other thing that delights me, of course, is just being outside in my garden. If you take an ultraviolet flashlight, I recommend it, and go out at night. And like tonight is a summery night, and then take a look. And what you'll find is Lepidoptera. You'll find moths. There's 170,000 species of moths. It's the biggest an animal kingdom. There's more moths than any other kingdom or species, excuse me. And they're pollinators, and they're out there, and they're all over the place. And when you do ultraviolet, though, they're, those beautiful sort of wings that look like flocked wallpaper or something, right? They light up. They're like psychedelic posters. And you go to your rosemary and go, oh my God, there must be 1,000 little moths on the rosemary at night. And it's where we live. And we don't know where we live. I said earlier, me too, by the way. I'm not the naturalist of, all time. Not at all. But to just start to discover that, and look at it and then just wonder, and how does it breed? How does it get there? How does it fly? How does it, why, why? And there's in the book, basically these owl butterflies. I mean, in Mexico, they're about 7 inches big, and they have eye spots, on their wings, 2 eyes. Those eyes are such a perfect replica of an owl that you say, how in the heck did this butterfly, over thousands and thousands of years, come to have 2 eye spots on its wings? And the purpose of them is to scare away other birds. That's its whole purpose. To see that, oh shit, that's an owl. No, it's a butterfly. But so how does that, butterfly, and I looked it up. I've tried to find out why. And said, oh, it's genetics. Excuse me. Like, genetics doesn't do that. That's how it's passed on, from one butterfly to another. No such thing as genetics. You and I, hard pressed, wouldn't be able to draw a better eye with all the art tools, unless you're a really great artist. And the butterfly. So,
Wow.
Yeah, it's just wondrous out there, and if it's wondrous out there, it's wondrous in here. Because it wouldn't be wonderful or wondrous if it wasn't in you.
Well, I think that's a beautiful note to end on, Paul. Folks, we've had the honor today of speaking with Paul Hawken, focusing on his new book, Carbon, the Book of Life. It's a beautiful, highly readable, highly important book. I hope everybody has a look at it. You can get it at banyan.com or come in person, corner of 4th and Dunbar in Vancouver. Paul Hawken's website is paulhawken.com. And thanks so much, as always, to the Banyan community and everything that you bring, your questions, your comments, your presence. We couldn't do it without you, and our producer, events coordinator, Jacob Steele. None of this would happen without his hard work, and everybody that works for Banyan. It's an amazing group of people, and the owner, Colin, and his daughter, Alethea, who's managing the store as well. Thanks to them. Paul, any final thoughts? Anything you want people to know about that you're up to?
Well, one, that I'm very grateful to you and Jacobs and everybody at Banyan and everybody who tuned in tonight. I wish I could meet you. Wish I could talk to you. I told Ross, I told you earlier, the best thing in the world is questions. I like to be in conversations and listen, and not just blah, blah. My grandfather was one who said, he said, I talked about, I do consulting, I do this. And he says, it's like a double boiler, you're not really cooking, but you're sure setting off a lot of steam. No, it's, but I feel like I want to, when I'm enclosed and upheld by an institution like Banyan, I really feel that. And it's extraordinary. And, but so I just want to really say thank you. And I'm deeply grateful that you exist. And I'm sure the people there tonight, here tonight, what they do is equally extraordinary. And I just want to honor that in whatever way I can. Yeah.
Thanks for joining us for Branches of Wisdom, a podcast of Banyan Books and Sound, Canada's spiritual and healing resource since 1970. Our podcast producer is Jacob Steele, and I'm your host, Ross McKeechee. Watch all our conversations on YouTube by searching for Banyan Books, or listen on your favorite podcast platform. Please subscribe, follow, like, and leave your reviews and comments. We love to hear from you. For all our live events, books, and more, visit us at banyan.com.